Hello, I'm Michael Hainsworth, veteran BNN senior anchor and IDC contributing editor and creator of Where's My Jetpack? IDC predicts cloud-related services spending will grow 20% this year and for the foreseeable future as companies accelerate the digitalization fueled by COVID-19. But for companies looking to initiate or expand their cloud-based platforms to capitalize on this, it's important to walk before they run. The speed of implementation of complex projects is fraught with risk. The risk of cybersecurity breaches is real, but can be mitigated with effective ransomware and backup strategies. And the IT skills gap, combined with spreading resources too thin, risks derailing a project and corporate growth. For insight into best practices into cloud adoption as part of this digital transformation we're witnessing today is Carbon60's Rob Stevens. Rob, hello.
Hello, Michael. How are you doing?
Thank you. Tell me, can we have digitalization without the cloud today?
Absolutely, we can, and people have been doing that for many years. But the cloud is offering a much easier consumption vehicle to make that happen. The level of services, the level of capabilities, the economies of scale that are being offered now to customers make it a lot easier for that digitalization. And a lot of customers are looking at different workloads that they take, something that maybe they were hosting internally, but they need now to upgrade. They need to get new capabilities. They need to offer new departments, or they need to take a very legacy kind of process that they need to do and automate that. The cloud is really that platform to offer those services to in a much more consumable way, a much more seamless way, without going through the procurement of hardware, the monitoring, the maintenance, and everything else that we've seen. So it is possible. It's just not as easy and not as simplified.
I can imagine if you're trying to do it yourself, then it's all on you. Whereas if you have a cloud provider, if you have a security provider, these types of organizations help make that so much more effective, and you can get to where you need to go so much quicker.
100%. Yeah, in actual fact, it's one of the pitfalls of, or potential pitfalls of going to the cloud, is that you can go with so much speed. I worked for Amazon for just under 6 years, and I was at Microsoft for just under 13 years. And what we would frequently see is adoption go very fast, and then customers realize, oh my goodness, am I actually getting myself into trouble here? Do I have the right security set up? Do I have the right controls in place? And they get kind of overwhelmed with the simplicity or the easiness of being able to spin up new services. And before you know it, you've got a bunch of services spun up that you didn't need, that you were playing with testing or whatever, and you don't really understand how they fit into your kind of corporate governance structure. So yes, it is an amazing benefit, but it's also a consideration.
So then, as I said, companies need to learn to walk before they can run or fly in the cloud. What kind of pace is required for an organization's effective move to the cloud?
The pace can really vary. It does depend on the skill set. And you mentioned skills gap. It does depend on the skill set that the team has. It does depend on the familiarity that they have with the cloud. We do see some customers taking a very sort of step-by-step approach, and they say we want to move out, a database strategy or our whatever CRM strategy or our HR strategy, or different workloads moving to the cloud one by one by one. And as soon as confidence kind of builds up that the cloud is delivering what we thought it was going to deliver, we are running in a secure environment, we're operating with the same processes and procedures, and we've got those things in place, then we really see those migrations kind of ramp up, and we really get some momentum around there. There are some people that take a bit more of a wild approach and kind of just start spinning up things in the cloud and want to move everything across. But again, those people tend to run into the issues very quickly. The instant excitement that they can get, they run into some challenges and say, actually, how do we now control that? So workload by workload, and then considering a mass migration is typically what we've seen.
I suppose what you're suggesting here is that speed is sort of relative to the culture within the corporation, and the C-suite needs to understand how nimble the company can or cannot move and try to adopt procedures that work best for that culture.
Absolutely. And one of the things that we recognized very early on with our Canadian customers when we were starting to migrate them to the cloud is if you don't have that executive buy-in, and if the C-suite is not aware of kind of the benefits and the process, whether it's a security, whether it's the financials, whether it's the business individuals, and understanding the value that you're going to get there, we do find that, those things stall. And you also need sponsorship, because the cloud is still relatively new. It's no longer a question of kind of why go into the cloud, it's really of when. But there are still a lot of legacy thinking and thought processes that maybe slow people down. So you need those executive sponsors to kind of make sure that someone is got that drive and is continuing to push forward once you've made that decision, because we do see some things stall when they're left to customers' own devices.
So then how do we explain to the C-suite that slow and steady wins the race? And how do we go about compounding the complexity of a deployment?
You know, I think there's numerous case studies now. You know, the largest organizations all the way down to the smallest organizations are benefiting from the cloud, whether you're on AWS, whether you're on Microsoft Azure, or whether you're on the Google platform. And there's whatever industry you're in, there's a reference for that. And there's, you know, very documented good success stories on how people have been able to do that. But more so than that, I think it's making sure that you can articulate a plan to actually do the assessment correctly. So let's assess where we're coming from. Let's assess where we're going to. Let's assess all of the different steps that we need to go through and put together a thoughtful plan on how that migration is going to work. And what are the key kind of indicators that that's working properly? Because a lot of things that we've done in IT in previous years and legacy, I can remember building a TCO up front and saying, look, these are the benefits we're going to get, but no one ever goes back and measures those at the end of that project. With the cloud, it's very easy to say, this is what the estimated cost is going to be, this is what the functionality is going to look like, etc. Now you can measure those in a very outcome-driven approach when you've actually done some of those migrations. So it is a slow and steady step by step, but from the largest to the very smallest organizations, there's benefits throughout.
Right. How do you know that you've done this successfully if you aren't testing against what you've already accomplished?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the main thing, whether it's a POC and a proof of concept and you're trying to prove out the concept of a service or a solution, you need to understand what you're looking for. It needs to be well defined and well documented. You have to, we work closely with our customers to explain to them that these are the 3 or 4 or 5 things that we're expecting to come out of this. Would you agree with that? And once you show that you've got control around that, and once you show that you're driving towards those outcomes, then you get a lot more sponsorship.
CISOs need to understand as well that cloud providers are responsible for securing the cloud, but not the content.
Yeah, no, absolutely. The CISO play a vital role in this. And I think we're still educating many customers to how the hyperscale cloud providers consider security and many things that they do around security. You know, you listen to people like Andy Jassy in previous customer-facing events like reInvent, and he will tell you security is our #1 thing. You know, we're heavily focused on security, but it's not all the responsibility of the cloud provider. It is what the cloud providers call a dual responsibility model. So the cloud provider is responsible for the security of the cloud, but you are responsible as a customer for the security of what's in the cloud. So you don't want to be putting an application in the cloud that has open ports or vulnerabilities in them or is susceptible to attacks. You can use all of the controls and all of the infrastructure that the cloud provides, but you've got to make sure that your application is taking advantage of those. So the CISO needs to be very much aware of those things, that the application is secure, but also on the monitoring and the detection and the protection and the recovery and all of those key things that we always talk about with CISOs, that they exist and that they have been configured in the cloud as well.
So then how does the National Institute of Standards and Technology's NIST framework help organizations understand, manage, and then reduce their cybersecurity risk?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I mean, the 5 pillars that the NIST framework provides, and we just mentioned most of them there, whether it's detection, identification, response, recovery, things that you've mentioned there, they're absolutely critical to helping customers understand and helping customers run through a checklist on what am I doing in these areas. It's a great conversation to have with customers, and we speak to them and say, what are you doing in this area for protection? What are you doing for identification? What are you doing for remediation? You know, what are you doing for recovery in the worst case situation? And it provides a very structured kind of framework for customers to kind of have that conversation. And you'll be surprised how many customers are heavily focused in one area and not the others. And, you know, if you're not covering off all 5 of those areas, then you could potentially be vulnerable to some form of attack. So yeah, that's a topic we have frequently with our customers.
Well, let's talk about those 5 pillars and give us a sense as to what we need to understand about them that many people don't realize. First, we've got identify, then we've got protect, detect, and then at the very end, we've also got recovery in there as well, do we not?
Well, recovery is at the end, but it's actually something that we're being seen that as being elevated, and a lot of customers are accelerating the recovery aspect of that because it is the last bastion of defense that you've got if you are under some kind of ransomware attack or some crypto locker attack or some kind of hacking event, most customers, whilst they would have preferred to know where the entry point was coming in, they will identify it, they could respond to it. In the situation that it's now infected their environment and now they're at risk or being held to ransom, what they typically want to do is be able to get their environment up and running as quickly as they can in a secure, clean, safe environment so that their business can continue. So we do actually see, even though it's one of the last pillars in the NIST framework, we do see some people elevating that and saying, look, let's do the recovery thing first of all. Now I can sleep at night if I know that anything's going to go wrong. And now I want to go and relook at all of the other areas that I've got around identification, remediation, protection, and all those areas you've just talked about.
It's fascinating that companies typically only focus on action item number 5, recovery. What though of detect? I can imagine if you've managed to detect, you're not going to have to recover.
It's very true, yeah. But I think a lot of customers' hesitation is, and we see this all the time, competing projects that organizations have. Is it going to add business value? Is it going to increase my sales? Is it going to lower my cost of doing business or increase production rates, or all those things? And I think that IT departments are constantly battling with the priorities list that they have and what's most important. And whilst the CISO and the security team would like to make security number 1, I think there is still an impetus to kind of push other solutions there. What we are seeing is more and more customers come to us and say, can you just provide this as a service? We need this managed detection. We need the response. We need someone to kind of know that. What does that look like? We've actually partnered with Arctic Wolf, who are a major player in this space, and we're seeing massive traction with working with our customers and the interest that we get to be able to offer that as a solution-based offering to them, rather than them having to go and create a security operations center, rather than to deploy the infrastructure, rather than to keep constantly on top of new alerts or new vulnerabilities and all the new things that come with that. So we are seeing, we have seen customers kind of, the prioritization be an issue, but now with offering these things as a service-based offering, we see a lot of interest in that.
I guess that brings up perhaps the biggest issue facing the IT department today when deploying a cloud platform, the skills gap.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think you'd have to have been asleep at the wheel in the last 2 years to see that there's definitely a challenge in the market for recruiting and getting good skills. And one of the things that we are definitely see with our customers is they think that they have the right skills in place and they want to go and execute one of these projects. But in actual fact, when they sort of click 2 or 3 levels down, maybe the people that they have don't have the actual real world experience doing that. Maybe they have some textbook experience, but you've really got to have kind of lived and breathed it, especially around a topic like security that's very, very deep. So we do see competition in the market that customers are competing with to try and get the right people. And it's very hard for them sometimes to even maintain those people. So even once you've onboarded somebody and you've taught them the ways of your company and the processes and procedures, they may be then off to the next best thing and moving around as well. So it's not only the skills that you've got, it's being able to maintain those skills and be able to have those. We often work with, back to the cloud conversation, we often work with a lot of companies where they want to move to a cloud, but they don't have the right certifications or they don't have the right skills enrolled for that. And maybe they're moving from one cloud provider to another, or maybe they want some kind of multi-cloud strategy. In many cases, they've got good skills in one cloud, but they're not having the other. So it's a minefield for sure.
I can imagine many IT managers would simply argue their resources are already spread too thin.
Oh, I think I don't think you get much pushback from any IT manager with their team saying that. I think IT has offered tremendous and incredible value to organizations to do things faster, quicker, better. But we never stop that pace. That pace just continues and continues. And whether it's a competing project for a new solution, or whether it's to digitize something or to kind of move to a modern area, or even if it's just trying to keep the lights on and just keep upgrades and patching and all those things going on, it is a massive overhead and undertaking for there, which is why we've seen businesses like ours grow and be successful, where we can just take that burden off of customers, offer them the solutions that they need with accountabilities that they expect from their own organization, and really still benefit from the same technology.
So then how does the IT department add value to a third-party cloud deployment?
I think the IT department, then it's not just about IT anymore. It's about being that facilitator, being that conduit back to the business and understanding what the business is really trying to achieve. Being able to translate what the business is trying to do into some technical terms. They don't necessarily need to be the implementer of that technology. They don't need to be the 24/7 operations team monitoring that solution, but they do need to understand kind of the technologies in the market, the solutions that are in the market, and the best options for them that we're going to. We recently actually had a customer who was looking at a Kubernetes solution, and they were very convinced that us managing a Kubernetes solution for them in our managed hosting environment was the way they wanted to go. They loved the services we provided. They loved the service that they were getting from the individuals. They wanted us to manage that. We spent probably 2 weeks educating them and convincing them why public cloud managed Kubernetes is a much better solution for them and why that was going to be better for them. We actually had to go as far as to showing them what that looked like from a financial basis, because they were convinced that we were going to make more money because we were trying to educate them so aggressively on this. The reality is we weren't, but it was the right thing to do for the customer, and educating customers as to what's out there is really what our role is about, and making sure they can make the right decisions for their business.
Okay, so once we've started walking, how do we run? How do we scale cloud deployment?
Again, it comes back to those individual workloads, and it comes back to making an assessment of which workloads do you want to put in the cloud. There may be some governance requirements, there may be some legal, there may be financial implications, there may be infrastructure that you just want to get off or don't want to get off. But once you've built up that migration process, and once you've understood those interdependencies of applications, of the networking component of the entire stack, you really do build up momentum, and it becomes almost second nature. In actual fact, going back to the disaster recovery solution, when I was at Amazon running the DR business, we actually had a lot of customers that were using the disaster recovery replication technology. And once they'd actually fallen over into the cloud, they used that as their migration. They witnessed that they were replicating their on-premise environment. It was now running in the cloud. It was running perfectly, highly performant, no issues. And they essentially just completed their migration unwittingly. So they said, you know what, we're actually going to stay there. So it's about building confidence. It's about making sure you understand the interdependencies and the interconnections between your applications and your workloads. And then you really can build up the momentum. And again, if a customer looks to build those skills themselves, they absolutely can. It may take a bit longer, or you can work with organizations like us and many others in Canada who have done that, hundreds and hundreds of times, and can offer insight as to avoiding the pitfalls and the most effective way of doing that.
So we've talked about some of those pitfalls associated with walking before you run, but once you run, how do you ensure you don't trip? Well, what are some of the best practices to ensure that that scale works effectively? Because I can imagine there are different issues at play once you get larger at this.
Yeah, there are. I think that it's, the larger consumption you move to the cloud doesn't necessarily scale the complexity. And I think that's one of the challenges, is that we see a lot of people consuming the cloud very quickly and then sort of sitting back and saying, "Ooh, I didn't expect the cost to be as high as they are," or "I didn't expect this to happen," or, "Now do I need to get someone in to kind of recheck the architecture to make sure I'm conforming to all the standards that I need?" So it's not about adding more complexity per se, but you do need the checks and balances every time that you migrate a new workload. Some of the pitfalls may be for security, but they could also be process and people driven. And if you don't have the right tools on premises to be able to make sure you're monitoring the cloud in the same way that you'd monitor the on-premises environment, that can be a huge headache, and it could be a huge cost. Now, all of the hyperscale cloud providers have solutions for these. They give you a single pane of glass now to be able to monitor whether you're on-premise or you've got a cloud environment, you've got these hybrid environments. So it can be a mix, but yes, tooling, insight, understanding the people and the process side of things is just as important.
It's interesting that you point out the people side of the equation. Often that is the weakest link in a security deployment. Often it's the weakest link in the deployment of any kind of large scale project. You need to understand what your people know and what they don't know.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, again, it's more than just being textbook educated as well. There are people that have taken test certification, but never actually done these things in practice. And what you should really be looking for when you're either recruiting people or working with third parties is ask them what the credentials are. How many times have you actually done this, and where have you done this, and what did you learn from those situations? That's really going to be the key to making sure that your people are up to scratch.
Rob, fascinating stuff. Thank you for your time and insight.
Thank you, Michael. Great to see you.
And thank you for joining us as we discussed accelerating the digitalization post-COVID-19 and the role that the cloud plays. We learned today that one of the biggest risks to an effective implementation is the speed of that implementation. Take it slow, find success, then build on that success. Projects don't need to be complex at the start, but they need to be secure. Following the cybersecurity NIST framework requires more than just focusing on the recovery post-attack. It's about identifying risks, protecting assets, and detecting intrusions as well. And as IT departments face a significant skills gap, strong vendor relationships can bring more than just value. They can provide the skills needed to accelerate cloud adoption. Again, a special thank you to Carbon 60's Rob Stevens. I'm Michael Hainsworth. Cloud Summit 2022 continues.